Nina walked past the imperial servant in a hurry. She expressed her dissatisfaction, and Nina stopped. She asked worriedly what had happened and whether she had done anything wrong. The imperial maid haughtily declared that Nina had blocked her way. Nina looked at her blankly and said that she was just going her own way. The imperial maid snorted, surprised that Nina thought that they were of the same status and that there was no division between higher and lower among the maids. She pointed her finger at Nina, saying that she herself was Carlyle's servant, and Nina was only the Lord's servant, and it was easy to guess which of them was higher. Nina said uncertainly that it was probably her, and the imperial servant pointed her finger at herself in confirmation. The imperial maid still asked haughtily if she needed to explain why it was impolite to cross her path, but Nina only shook her head and apologized, saying that she had not known about it. The imperial maid told her to be more careful in the future. The imperial maid snorted. It was no wonder that the lower-ranking maids were no good when they were ruled by that woman called a lord. Nina clenched her fists. She was ready to endure insults directed at herself, but not at the lord. Tears welled up in her eyes when the imperial maid left, as she felt that such treatment was undeserved. Asha had put an end to the war with the barbarians and had done so much for Pervaz. She was a heroine. Nina was wiping away her tears when Della called out to her. Nina began to tell her hesitantly about Carlyle's maid. She told how hurt she was by what she said about Asha. Della listened to everything and said that this is why they should try their best, because this will also increase Asha's dignity. She told Nina that if they lacked something, they should learn it from them, even if they had to bow their heads, so that later they could show that they were much better. Nina wiped away her tears. She bowed, said that she understood everything and would try not to show herself from an unreliable side again, and not to let Asha down. Inspired, she set off to do her job. Della sighed, glad that this was the end of the conflict with Nina, but she knew it wasn't the end. Della came to Decker, who was surprised by her visit and asked what made such a busy man come to him. She reported that Carlyle's maid had insulted Asha in Nina's presence. Decker asked again, not believing it at first, but Della said that several people had already complained about it. Quietly, Della added that this had been happening since the first day they entered the feud. She explained that she decided to tell this anyway because she believed that something more dangerous could happen. Decker clenched his fists. What he heard made him angry. He promised her to talk to Asha. Della noticed that Carlyle was an unyielding man, and it was worth talking to him too. After some time, a servant reported to Carlyle that Margrave Pervaz wanted to meet with him. Carlyle ordered that she be let in. Carlyle looked up from his paper and said that Asha had come at a good time, because he had just wanted to tell her something. But looking at her determined face, he paused. He asked what had upset her so much. Asha said she had something she wanted to ask for, and Carlyle asked her to make the request, thinking it must be something about supplies or something since Asha was taking the matter so seriously. She asked him to take care of the control over the subordinates so that they would not pick on or insult her subordinates. Carlyle was surprised because she never reacted when she was insulted, and now he didn't understand what was making her react now. Carlyle noted thoughtfully that his people would not pick on him without cause. Asha asked if Carlyle remembered the contents of the contract he made with her, and Carlyle said that he had faithfully fulfilled it. She asked Lionel to bring the contract. Lionel brought it. Asha said there were things she asked for first. She reminded that she was ready to accept disdain and ridicule towards herself, but nothing like that should be allowed towards the inhabitants of Pervaz. Besides, if their hearts changed, then it would be more difficult for Carlyle himself to achieve what he wanted. Carlyle asked what would happen if he ignored her warning. Asha said coldly that if he wanted her help, he should be careful, because there was no cure for a rabid dog bite. Carlyle admired her honest answer and took her words seriously. He asked Lionel to gather all the servants. An hour later, all the servants were gathered in the hall. Carlyle, along with Asha and Lionel, looked at the crowd. The servants whispered uneasily. Carlyle said sternly that he had heard that someone present had insulted his wife. He turned to Asha to confirm the veracity of this. Asha was surprised that he called her by name, but she confirmed the truth of these rumors, saying that the evidence was given by those who have been working in Pervaz Castle for a long time. The maid who had recently scolded Nina began to get nervous. Carlyle said that since the witnesses were so offended, they would probably remember the faces. Nina looked straight at him confidently. Carlyle sighed and said that if what they told his wife was not a lie, then they should come out right now and point the finger at the culprits. Nina looked at Asha, silently asking for approval. Asha nodded. The maids pointed out the imperial servants who were insulting Asha. Carlyle asked those pointed out to come forward, But the maids, having done so, behaved haughtily, believing that Carlyle was not taking this matter seriously and nothing would happen. Carlyle asked if that was all, and Asha said that it was all from the memories of her servants. And while no one was looking, the imperial servants were probably behaving even worse, to which the servants shouted that it was a lie. The imperial maid protested, saying that she was only teaching Asha's servants manners, since they were treating them with disdain, as if they were newcomers. Asha was shocked when the maid blurted out that Asha had come up with this herself to suppress the spirit of the imperial servants. Nina felt guilty about what was happening. Carlyle was thoughtful. He immediately understood what was going on and decided to approach it from afar. He asked the imperial servant who she thought his wife was, and she was taken aback by such a question. He repeated his question in a stern and cold tone. She said nervously that his wife was the Margrave of Pervaz, and as she said this, she realized that she had miscalculated when she thought that Carlyle did not care about this situation. Carlyle chuckled, saying that only he could address her that way, and that everyone else was required to call her Your Highness. In the same cold tone, he said that since the maid dared to interrupt the crown princess, the accusations of Pervaz's servants were not false. The imperial maid was shocked by this turn of events. Carlyle called Lionel. To Lionel's surprise, he ordered him to deal with them as criminals who had insulted a member of the imperial family. Lionel said they didn't have enough hands to execute everyone. Carlyle admitted he hadn't thought of it and suggested they all just cut out their tongues. The servants began to fall on their knees and beg for mercy. Asha was confused. She asked Carlyle to stop it. Carlyle looked at her in confusion, and she sternly said that she didn't ask anyone to have their tongues cut out. Carlyle took this to mean that it was not enough for her to cut out one tongue, but Asha said that none of that was necessary, and that she wanted mutual respect between the imperial people and the people of Pervaz. Carlyle adamantly declared, despite the weeping servants, that she was a member of the imperial family whom they had insulted, and they must be punished for it. Asha sighed, saying that she herself sometimes wondered if she was the crown princess, so it was no wonder that other people had such doubts. Besides, if something was cut off from them, they would be incapacitated for some time, and as Lionel rightly pointed out, Pervaz was short of hands. Carlyle asked what she wished him to do with them then. Asha looked at the imperial servants. Asha turned to the servants and said that she understood that they might be unhappy with life in Pervaz, but since they were here, everyone should help each other. Friction should not become the cause of a lack of mutual understanding. The servants stopped crying as she called for mutual respect, Asha saying that while Pervaz might seem rude and disappointing at first, the people here had sacrificed much to protect the lands from the barbarians. Asha asked the servants not to look down on the people of Pervaz. That was all she wanted. Carlyle listened to this speech with satisfaction and watched Asha. He said that even after committing a crime, thanks to the crown princess, they kept their tongues and necks. The servants fell to their knees and began to bow to the floor, thanking Ash. Carlyle warned that there would be no second time, and that they should take care of the necks and tongues they had saved today. Asha was about to leave. This whole situation had tired her out. Carlyle asked for a reconciliation dinner, but Asha didn't understand what he meant, since there had been no fight. She said that she had to go and went out. Carlyle looked at her with disappointment. He asked himself dejectedly what he had to do to invite her to dinner. The Empress returned to the high priest, saying that she had thought carefully about everything and accepted his proposal, which made him incredibly happy. The high priest took her hand and said that God would be the first to know of her sincerity. The Empress asked him to lend her his wisdom. She told him that Carlyle had gone to the border territory of Pervaz, where the imperial family could not interfere, and although the Empress had tried to prevent his marriage, nothing had worked. The high priest noted that Carlyle was trying to protect his most trusted instrument, but assured the Empress that Lord Labato was careful with his loyal people and that they would have a new opportunity. The Empress expressed doubt that God could help her with this matter. The high priest smiled mysteriously, saying that she didn't need to worry about it and that she would find out everything when the time came. The Empress was delighted with these words. September soon arrived in Pervaz, and the wheat began to sprout in the fields. The residents of Pervaz happily walked through the fields and discussed when it was best for them to harvest potatoes. But suddenly, clouds appeared, and the residents were surprised by them, because it seemed that there was no sign of rain. Looking closer, they began to suspect that it was not rain. They looked closely at the cloud and concluded that rain clouds were not that color and could not be that low. The elderly man said that he had seen something like this 28 years ago. He shouted that it was an attack and that the barbarians were advancing. He said that everyone should hide in the cave, and he would inform the lord about what was happening so that they would not lose the opportunity to harvest. The people of Pervaz listened to him and ran straight through the fields with the harvest. Pervaz Castle was serenely illuminated by the rays of the sun, and nothing yet foreshadowed trouble for its inhabitants. Carlyle looked out the window thoughtfully, believing that the situation in Pervaz had finally reached stability. He assumed it had something to do with the current food supply to Pervaz, and while Lionel agreed, he noted that the root cause was still how much effort Asha was putting into things. After some thought, Carlyle agreed, also remembering the efforts of Decker, whom he initially considered not a very useful knight in these matters, but he proved himself to be much better. Lionel noticed that not only Decker Donovan, but all the inhabitants of Pervaz were surprising and seemed more spiritual than the people from the capital. Carlyle agreed that the rumors he had heard about Pervaz were just that, unscrupulous rumors that had nothing to do with reality. He recalled the recent events and how people had treated Asha, and acknowledged that loyalty and conviction that could not be found in the capital were alive in the people of Pervaz. While sorting through his correspondence, Lionel was surprised to discover one special letter. It was a letter from Count Dupre, and Lionel immediately handed it to Carlyle to read. The Duke opened the letter, and just reading the first lines, smiled and said that it was all very funny. Lionel asked what the Count was writing about, and Carlyle replied that the Count had promised to send Pervaz in the near future an incontrovertible proof of loyalty from the Dupre family. Lionel was surprised, thinking that Cecilia Dupre would have to back down after losing her status as crown princess. But Carlyle noted that she was cunning and was clearly expecting him to get divorced in 3 years and use that opportunity for herself to become crown princess. He noted that the head of the Dupre family has a similar position, but only Cecilia has the greatest ambitions. Lionel nodded, saying that Cecilia stood out from the crowd, and suggested that deep down, Carlyle himself had long ago chosen her to be the crown princess. Carleen thought gloomily that Lionel was right, even though she resembled his mother in both appearance and ambition. Carlyle was pulled out of his thoughts by Lionel's question about whether he had feelings for Cecilia, but this only angered Carlyle, and Lionel was surprised. He recalled that Carlyle had danced with Cecilia at every victory banquet, but the Duke had only said it was a strategy to hook her. Lionel became even more thoughtful as he recalled these dances, and expressed the thought that it seemed to him that Lady Dupre herself liked Carlyle very much. Carlyle asked him if this meant that she was in love with him, but Carlyle didn't let him answer, saying that in fact she didn't like him, but the position of crown princess. Lionel was amazed by such an assumption. Carlyle just snorted, saying that it was all fake, and that if necessary, even he could pretend to be in love, but Lionel questioned the latter. He calmly noted that Carlyle didn't even understand what it was like to fall in love, and so it would be difficult for him to play something like that convincingly. Carlyle decided not to continue the topic, and said that he was worried about what exactly they wanted to give him as evidence of loyalty, while Lionel assumed that they were talking about jewelry or antiques. Carlyle, however, thought grimly that they were about to do something truly absurd. The alarm, sounding so loudly and suddenly, caught them by surprise and forced them to abandon this conversation. Carlyle clearly heard someone shouting about an attack and the need for an immediate evacuation. Asha armed herself upon hearing of the attack, but noticed that fortunately for them, the attackers were few in number and were probably in a desperate attempt to deal a fatal blow to Pervaz's men. She coldly noted that they were generally right, as Pervaz's army had suffered greatly and was reduced in numbers, and the weapons they possessed were quite old. Decker said worriedly that now was not the time for pride and that it would be worth asking Carlyle for help, but Asha asked again about pride. She looked at Decker sternly and asked if he really thought she cared about pride. Decker bowed guiltily and admitted that he had said something absolutely stupid and that Asha had not acted out of pride. Asha smiled. She didn't blame him and told him so, explaining that she was acting strategically and she didn't care if it looked like an attempt to save pride. She replied that if several barbarians came running and begged for their lives, the relationship between Pervaz and Carlyle could become even more strained. She said the problem would be that no matter what order Carlyle gave, they would have to follow it, and for some, that might be too hard and unfair. Turning towards the exit, she noted that this was precisely why it would be better if they stopped the small fish of the tribe themselves. She told Decker that she would inform Carlyle of what had happened, and then immediately leave the castle to stop the threat and asked him to be prepared for anything. Decker was completely supportive of her and said that he would carry out the orders given to him and would not let her down. Asha, accompanied by a maid, came to Carlisle to explain to him what was happening. Leaving the maid behind, she walked boldly inside, her eyes searching the room for Carlisle. Carlisle, however, was at ease. He smiled and asked what had brought her to him in such a hurry. Asha was puzzled and thought that she didn't understand why he was pretending not to know what was happening, since he had obviously heard rumors about the tribe's attack. But since he wanted it that way, she calmly explained that the Egram tribe was one of the tribes in the abandoned lands, and since they had decided to attack, she would go and deal with them. Still calm and smiling, the Duke asked if there was anything he could do to help her with this. Asha said that there was something, and the Duke asked her to tell him what it was. She clenched her fists. It was an unpleasant topic, however. She understood that she had to consider all the possibilities for the sake of Pervaz's good. She calmly said that in the event of her death, the title of Margrave would go to Carlisle, and in this case, she asks him to bear responsibility for the Margraveship with dignity. Carlisle was surprised. He asked again if he really had to help only with this. Her request sounded extremely specific. Asha nodded, expressing the hope that in this case the Duke would put his heart and soul into the matter. Carlisle only marveled at her willingness to go to her death, and asked if he was sure that there was nothing more he could do to help her. Still indifferent, Asha expressed the wish that if in the future the Duke had several descendants, it would be good if one of them subsequently inherited the title of Margrave. Carlisle was silent. He was caught by the words about it being with someone else. Asha bowed to him, introducing herself with her full name, thus signifying the importance of the moment. She vowed to return only after she had destroyed the enemies who threatened the Duke's safety. Carlisle stood up and noted with displeasure that such a farewell was far from romantic and that no one would ever see them as spouses. He didn't like this approach and he was going to fix it, so he moved closer to Asha. He came unforgivably close on purpose, intending to do something he thought would embarrass her. After a moment's hesitation, Carlisle gently but firmly embraced her and chastely kissed her forehead. He said with a smile that he wished for the blessing of Agurs to be on her side and that he would pray for his wife's victory. Although it shocked her a little, Asha quickly got her emotions under control and nodded to him in agreement with what he said. Without wasting any time, she jumped on her horse and set off with her warriors. Carlisle watched her departure through the window and asked Lionel if the knightly order was ready. He confirmed that the order had been ready for quite some time. Carlisle smiled, saying that he would finally be able to see with his own eyes the skill of Aisha Pervaz, who defeated the chieftain of the Lur tribe. Meanwhile, the enemy tribe was advancing. They were evil, cunning, and determined, wanting to subjugate Pervaz. Seeing them, Asha gave the order to shoot to kill, and not to spare any of the enemy. The archers immediately fired their arrows, and the warriors prepared their blades, ready to give their lives for Pervaz if necessary. Looking at the confused enemy, who was barely dodging the arrows, Asha realized that they were not prepared for the arrows, clearly expecting that Pervaz simply did not have them. Carlisle was still watching the battle through the window, and noted with a smile that the supplies that had been brought in had helped Pervaz much sooner than he had originally expected. Lionel rushed to the window, nervously pointing out the changes on the battlefield that threatened that someone might soon lose their life. Following the direction of his hand, Carlisle saw Asha rushing towards the enemy, and it seemed madness to him because it was certain death. He did not understand how the commander could rush forward and break through so recklessly. Lionel was very worried that Asha might die and suggested sending knights to help right now to avoid something irreparable. Although partly Carlisle wanted to agree with him, he decided to trust Asha and that she knew what she was doing and ordered her to wait. They saw how fiercely Asha fought, sparing no effort, expertly wielding her blade and shield. The leader of the tribe was rushing towards her, formidable and unwilling to lose. They were about to engage in a mortal battle. He raised his hand to strike and laughed at the fact that a woman had come out to fight him. Asha, however, calmly parried the blow and said that he should have known who she was according to rumors from the Lur tribe. Her face turned bloodthirsty, and she coldly noted that Rakhmusha, the leader of the Lur tribe, died after asking her the same question. Asha took advantage of the opportunity that opened up for her and dealt him a dangerous blow. This blow knocked the leader off his horse and proved fatal for him. The leader was eliminated. Asha looked around and shouted loudly that she was ready to kill the next enemy. Hearing this, a new enemy tried to attack her from behind, believing that she would not be able to avoid the blow and would die. But Asha did not live up to his expectations and steadfastly repelled the blow using her shield. Looking at his surprised face that she was able to avoid the attack, Asha delivered a killing blow straight to his stomach. He died almost immediately, falling to the ground, and Asha began to hold on to the horse more tightly and galloped on. Her gaze became bloodthirsty again. She looked around defiantly, choosing who would fall next at her hands. Carlyle, watching everything through binoculars, noted that it was amazing and simply unimaginable. He remembered Asha's reasoning about horses, and now he understood exactly why she wasn't interested in any kind of jewelry. Carlyle realized that she was constantly fighting threats that could lead to death, and therefore the jewelry was completely useless. Carlyle looked at the battlefield and saw her kill another enemy. As he watched all this, he recognized that Asha was not only excellent in combat, but also a great tactician, as she killed her opponents in a dangerous yet effective manner. Carlyle noted with pleasure that he had previously doubted whether Asha had really cut off the head of the Lure tribe chieftain, but now such doubts were gone. He thought that he would like to go and fight side by side with her on this battlefield now. He wondered if that was the reason she didn't ask him for help, and wanted him to see her fighting form. He was distracted from these thoughts by seeing a new enemy army advancing from the mountains. He immediately recognized it as a strike force hidden in the rear. It was a pretty good move on the part of the tribe. Lionel nervously noted that Pervaz's army did not have the strength to stop this group, and if Pervaz's army was defeated, then they would have a hard time. Carlyle thought seriously about his words, because it made sense. Pervaz's army really couldn't handle them alone anymore. He smiled slyly and said that since the situation was developing in this way, he simply had no choice, and it was time to start acting. He ordered the knights to prepare to destroy these rats, and intended to take part in it himself. Carlyle felt amused at the prospect of battle, and said that it would be a pleasure to help his wife clean up this mess. Meanwhile, Asha continued to fight aggressively and calmly on the battlefield, meeting new opponents. At the same time, the spirit of the opponents was already broken. Seeing the warriors and Asha, they were afraid to engage in battle with her, as they understood that it could be their last. Asha thought that they seemed not to expect Pervaz to have the strength to fight back, and so they only brought 1,000 soldiers to the battlefield. One of them called for a strike force, and Asha was surprised because she did not expect this force. Asha slowed her horse and turned towards the sound of hooves approaching from behind. Once she did this, she was able to see the number of enemy troops and where they were coming from. She shouted loudly that the enemy was advancing from the Cruz Mountains so that her army could hear it and be ready. Asha clenched her fists in irritation. She couldn't believe that the enemy had decided to cross the Cruz Mountains. She was pulled out of these unpleasant thoughts by an enemy soldier who joyfully rushed towards her to deliver a fatal blow. Asha wasn't fully prepared for this, but she managed to block the blow with her shield at the last moment. Asha shouted at Decker to take Danilo and 100 warriors and not let this group get here. Decker disagreed, saying that Asha and the remaining warriors would not last in that case, since they had only 500 soldiers at best. Asha dealt the killing blow to her new enemy and was worried, because Decker's words made sense. They fought back to back and, under the pressure of the situation, tried to come up with a plan that would help them win. And suddenly their comrades shouted that reinforcements had arrived and a support army had come. Decker and Asha turned around as one, unable to believe what was happening, as they had not expected any army of support. Asha thought that the 300 people who remained to guard the castle could not suddenly come to their aid. But then she raised her head and saw that these were not those people, but Carlyle himself with the knights. She was amazed and asked what the Duke was doing here, but he seemed not to hear her because of the sounds of battle. She had not yet received an answer from Carlyle, as the enemy, taking advantage of her confusion, began to attack. Asha didn't give him the chance to enjoy her blood and cut off his head with a precise movement of her blade. Having done this, she stopped herself, deciding to sort everything out later, because now was not the time to be distracted. Asha told Decker that it would be better if they left the Cruz Mountains to the Duke and the Knights and dealt with these troops themselves. Decker only noted that it was not for nothing that he said that the Duke was far from a bad person. Asha rushed furiously at the enemy, condemning them for daring to attack from behind like vile rats. Now, knowing that help had arrived, she felt more at ease about her people and fought without anxiety. Her blade moved confidently in her hands, cutting through flesh like air. She left no chance for her opponents. Asha rushed forward, leaving behind only the dead bodies of the enemy, who were never destined to rise again. The surviving enemy warriors whispered that the group from the mountains had been attacked by knights that Pervaz should not have had. One of the tribal leaders shouted for them to retreat as soon as he saw the knights approaching them. The tribe fled with their tails between their legs, and Asha watched in silence, listening to one of them complain that he had hoped they would be able to surround Pervaz in one day. And one of her warriors, amazed and joyful, shouted that they had managed to displace the tribe in just one day, and everyone rejoiced. Night fell, and Pervaz was dealing with the aftermath of this battle, and it was not an easy aftermath. The survivors sadly carried the bodies of their slain loved ones and friends away from the bloody battlefield, and this filled their hearts with emptiness. The infirmary actively helped the survivors, treating and healing their wounds. The maids happily served the others. They were incredibly happy that the warriors managed to defend Pervaz in such a short time. Asha was also glad. She knew that this battle could have dragged on, but due to the Duke's intervention, everything went quickly and with minimal casualties. After thinking about it, Asha decided that she needed to visit Carlisle and let Decker know about it. Decker said that although they had been blindly happy about the help earlier, now, in cold thinking, it was clear that the Duke could use this to his advantage, and how exactly he would do it had yet to be determined. Asha just smiled and said that they should be grateful to the Duke for his help anyway. Decker nodded to her. With his concerns, he didn't mean that they shouldn't thank him. Asha placed her hand on his shoulder in a calming gesture and advised him not to worry, as she knew the Duke would not overstep his bounds. Asha walked towards Carlisle and counted the losses. In this battle, they had 17 soldiers killed, 45 seriously injured, and 200 lightly wounded. While these were sad figures, it was much less damage than she had initially expected. She was worried about how Carlisle's people would react, but Asha knew that thanking Carlisle even a few times would not be enough for this help. The maid met Asha and opened the doors to Carlisle's study for her to enter. As Asha entered, she immediately saw Carlisle sitting with a somewhat arrogant expression on his face, which showed that he had been waiting for her. Carlisle was silent and just looked at her, clearly expecting her to break the silence and tell him something. Asha bowed and very sincerely expressed words of gratitude for the help the Duke had provided today. He looked at her with displeasure and noted that simply thanking her and leaving was somehow not enough after his help. He asked her if she really didn't feel comfortable even having a cup of tea with him, but she assured him that it was not like that at all. Asha pointed out that it was best to thank and apologize as soon as possible, which was why she had said those words, but Carlisle countered that he preferred to wait and then get to the point. He smiled slyly, saying that he found this approach much more fun than standard practices. As he said this, he poured warm tea into the cup, thereby clearly motivating Asha to stay and drink tea with him. He said that he understood that she was busy, but he would prefer that she keep him company and still have tea with him. Asha sat down opposite him and said that it would be an honor for her, but Carlisle asked her not to be so prim. After all, they were considered spouses. Asha took the cup by the handle and was amazed that such a fragile cup had reached Pervaz intact and had not broken on the way. She took a sip and was again amazed at how incredibly delicious the tea was. Carlisle carefully asked if she was angry, but Asha only looked at him questioningly, not understanding the question. Asha asked what he was talking about, and Carlisle explained that she hadn't asked for help, but he had just intervened without permission. He asked seriously if this had angered her, as he remembered their previous agreements and believed that Asha would not be happy about their violation. Asha briefly replied that she was not angry and felt inner turmoil. She did not understand why he was asking about this, because she came to thank him and did it sincerely. But she assumed that perhaps this is a feature of people from the capital, and they criticize or mock others like this. Putting her cup down, she noted that if Carlisle hadn't intervened, they would have suffered colossal damage, and she would blame herself and her arrogance for not asking him for help earlier. After thinking about it, she added that, of course, she would have done so if she had managed to survive at all, since in that scenario, there was a risk of death for her too. Carlisle asked her if she always went into battle prepared to die, but Asha was surprised and asked if there were any soldiers who went into battle without the determination to die. Carlisle seriously noted that he was just such a soldier, and when he went into battle, he did not intend to die. Asha sighed, noting that warriors were usually prepared for this, and death did not frighten them at all. Carlisle said he was surprised by this, especially the fact that Asha had made a will, and also suggested that her husband have an affair. They both remembered that moment, and how Asha had asked for one of Carlisle's heirs to be appointed as the ruler of Pervaz. Carlisle noted that if Asha loved Pervaz so much, it would be more logical for her line to continue to rule it. Asha shook her head, saying that it was not at all necessary for them to be her children, and that anyone with a sufficient sense of responsibility would do. Carlisle did not deviate from his line, He asked about the honor that should be shown to her father and brothers, and asked if it would not be a shame if Pervaz were taken over by someone else. Asha looked at him seriously and asked Carlyle if the title of Margrave Pervaz was actually a reward for her father. She continued coldly, reminding him that her father had faced two bitter choices, one of which was suicide, and the other of which was death at the hands of the Lure tribe, and Carlyle had nothing to say to that. It was less cold now. Asha said that there was hardly any honor in this that should be passed on to descendants. However, she felt hope that one day Pervaz would no longer be considered a place of exile, because the people of Pervaz were not to blame for everything that happened. She noted that Pervaz's people had even carried out the noble task of protecting the empire's borders. And after a moment of silence, Carlyle agreed with this. He admitted that he didn't expect Pervaz's army to be so strong, and this made Asha a little nervous. It made her happy. She was proud of her people, and Carlyle was glad to see the smile on her face. Asha nodded and thanked him again, saying that without his help, Pervaz's army would have failed. Carlyle decided to half-ass it, saying that he only did what he had to, because if Pervaz's army had been destroyed, he wouldn't have had any problems. Asha looked at him a little strangely, and he asked if she wanted to tell him anything else. expressed his incomprehension about how the temple leadership could treat them like that. High Priest Gabriel walked to his place at the table and said in a calm tone that they had nothing to worry about. He confidently stated that they would win in the end, since Lebato would bless them, and there simply could not be any other outcome. The rays of the sun illuminated the Pervaz castle, which had stood up to the attack of the warriors of the enemy tribe, and a new day was beginning for all the survivors. Asha walked towards Carlyle with deep misunderstanding, because she thought that they would not meet for some time, but for some reason he called her in the morning. She opened the door, and despite the Duke, formally greeted him, asking the reason for such an urgent call. Carlyle was dressed luxuriously and glowed with happiness. Looking at this smile, Asha understood that he was planning something out of the ordinary, and her intuition was right, because Carlyle said that he invited her here because they were married and should spend more time together. Asha looked at him and did not understand where such a change in behavior came from. Carlyle looked at her carefully and asked if she was really so disgusted by even a minute of time spent with him. Asha was surprised and said that it was not so. It was normal for her to spend time with him. Asha continued frankly that she was only worried that she was missing some hidden meaning behind the words, but Carlyle assured her that, as she had said, Pervaz was not a place for beating around the bush, so he hoped she would take what he said at face value. Asha looked at him even more surprised. She didn't understand how spending time as a married couple could not have a hidden meaning. He pointed out that 3 months had passed since his arrival in Pervaz, and they still had not had a chance to have a heart-to-heart talk, and that was wrong, since they were considered husband and wife. Asha hesitated, but then bowed and said that she would be happy to have a heart-to-heart talk with Carlyle if that was his wish. Carlyle smiled and said that was exactly what he had hoped for, but it would be better if Asha personally gave him a tour of Pervaz Castle, as it was too boring to sit in one place. After hesitating again, Asha again responded in agreement, still trying to catch the hidden meaning behind it all. They walked down the hall of the castle, and Carlyle noted that the work on the second floor had recently been completed, but the area still lacked attention. Asha felt awkward hearing this. She said that she was so ashamed that she couldn't even raise her eyes, but she still warned about this in advance. However, she noted that the castle servants had cleaned up beautifully, and Carlyle fully agreed with this, clarifying, however, that it was not just clean, but empty. Asha froze, understanding the meaning of the Duke's words only after what she saw ahead. The hall was empty and lonely, cobwebs were visible, and it was clear from the place that there had been no one and nothing there for a long time. Looking at this, she understood why the Duke's men were so shocked. They were clearly not used to seeing this. Asha tried to explain, saying that because of the war, people had no way to take care of the castle, and what little they had they sold or burned to survive the winter. Carlyle was surprised. He didn't expect people to use luxury items as firewood. Asha explained that the Lure people had set fire to all the mountains where trees grew, which meant that the people of Pervaz were unable to harvest wood, and since there was no point in dressing tables or grandfather clocks during the war, the people decided to put them to better use as firewood. Carlyle said thoughtfully that Lure's army was 20 times larger than Pervaz's army. Asha nodded, saying that from her personal feeling, it seemed like they were 50 times larger. But time after time, her father held back their attacks. Asha said that she felt awkward saying this in front of Carlyle, who had received the blessing of the god of war, Agurus, but she considered her father a warrior sent by God. Carlyle smiled and calmly noted that he had no intention of arguing. He said that only a warrior gifted by God himself could prevail in such unequal battles and ultimately play a key role in winning the war. Carlyle put his hand on her shoulder and said that even if she did not believe his words, as a knight, he respected Amir Pervaz very much. Carlyle noted that he was truly sorry that the first member of the royal family he encountered was his father. With that, Carlyle turned and walked further down the hall, intending to continue their tour. Asha watched him go, thinking that she hadn't expected Carlyle to show such an attitude towards other members of the imperial family. She followed him silently, and after a while, Carlyle noted that something was indeed strange. This was quite unexpected, and Asha asked him what exactly seemed strange to him. Looking at the wall, Carlyle said that he did not see a single portrait on the walls of the castle. He asked why there was no portrait of Amir Pervaz or other members of Asha's family on the walls, as this was a common practice. Asha, recalling these difficult times, noted that the war lasted for 28 years, and no one had time to take portraits. Carlyle pointed out that portraits were done by an artist, not a model, and that half a day a week would be enough. But Asha sighed and said that perhaps she should gain weight. She looked seriously at Carlyle and asked what artist would be willing to come to Pervaz, a place where at that time one could die at any moment. This thought had not occurred to Carlyle before, but now he realized its full truth. No artist would have wanted to come to Pervaz then. After a pause, Carlyle said that even if this was new to Asha, sooner or later they would have to paint her portrait, since it should be kept in the annals of the imperial family, and the second portrait should hang in this castle. Asha was amazed and asked why they hung portraits in the castle and what was the meaning of it. Now Carlyle was amazed and looked at her slightly indignantly. He asked how she would remember him without this very portrait. He turned around and walked on, jokingly noting that he forbade it from being destroyed, even if there was an urgent need for firewood, and he ordered Asha to preserve it for future generations. Asha looked at him with incomprehension. His words about how she should remember him were repeated in her head, and it was very strange. She looked at his broad back and wondered if Carlyle himself would think of her when he looked at the portrait. But that would be stupid and impossible. He wouldn't fish out their common portrait from the archives. Having accepted this thought, she confidently walked towards him so as not to lag behind. Meanwhile, in the temple, the high priest Owen said that it was not worth taking up too much of a busy man's time and suggested that they hurry up and start today's meeting. One of the priests remarked that 3 months had already passed since the Duke of Carlisle's departure for Pervaz, and another priest asked irritably whether it was not time to take action. They were talking about how outrageous it was that a man with God's blessing lived contrary to God's will, indulged in sexual relations, avoided the temple, and was a dissolute and arrogant young man who even desired his father's mistress. They said that Carlyle's sins were hard to wash away, and the high priest Gabriel just listened to them silently, without interrupting. They discussed this, and he remembered that this did not only concern Carlyle Evaristo, because all the nobles were arrogant and vile people. He remembered how easily they destroyed other people's souls, and how disgusted he always felt about it. He thought that Ilakism had always been the only salvation for his own soul in the midst of all this darkness and vice. He recalled how he was taken to training, and that the main thing he learned in all this was that nobles are not the top of anything, because before God everyone is equal. He thought then that God himself does not lord it over anyone, so why did the nobles decide that they had the right to do so and exalt themselves above others? He read various legends that said that people should not be divided by origin, status, or wealth. Because of fallen people, he knew, the whole empire was sinking, and he saw only one way to get the empire back on its feet, and that was to build a pure and just empire according to the will of God. Gabriel left his thoughts and broke the silence for those around him. With a smile, he said that they did not have time to mention all these sins. Despite all these difficulties, they must create a sacred empire. He explained that this was why they had to help the empress place her son, Matthias, on the throne, and the other priests agreed with this, but expressed confusion about how to do this. Gabriel smiled wider and said that there was one way. For this, they needed to make it so that during Matthias's ascension, society changed its attitude towards Carlyle. A few days later, Cecilia was riding in her carriage with her maid to Pervaz. The maid was worried about Cecilia and complained that Pervaz did not provide a proper road. Cecilia was dissatisfied. She understood that if it were not for the strength of the carriage, they would have had a very hard time, but she was not going to give up, because she had already put so much effort into all this. She recalled how her brother Ellen mocked her when he learned that she was actually going to Pervaz. He looked at her haughtily and said that Pervaz didn't have her favorite macaroons, and that high society didn't exist as a concept. She then looked at him angrily and coldly, explaining that she needed all this only in order to become the crown princess in the future. She snorted at her brother's short-sightedness and said that she was going to work hard on the crown princess's position. Dylan Dupre, her second brother, noted that these were all very cold-blooded moves and that it was unlikely that anyone would love her like that. She looked at them darkly, thinking that those who inherited the business and family simply because they were born men would never understand her. She knew she had no choice but to make Carlyle Evaristo emperor. Meanwhile, at Pervaz, Giles came to him and asked him if he remembered the Dupre family's promise to prove their loyalty, and Carlyle said that he remembered it perfectly well. He said that the proof had just been brought to the castle. Carlyle became interested and asked to bring it. Lionel, already knowing what kind of evidence this was, sadly opened the door, already roughly imagining what was about to happen. Cecilia took a step into the room, walking confidently and putting on her most welcoming and formal expression. She bowed to Carlyle and formally wished him that God's blessing would always remain with him. She looked up at Carlyle confidently, smiled at him, and finally greeted him more simply. Carlyle was shocked by the fact that Cecilia Dupre had gone and shown up at Pervaz Castle in person. Cecilia smiled and said that it was written in her father's letter, and now she had come here to help Carlyle return to its former greatness. Carlyle smirked arrogantly and asked if she really had to do that, since he doubted she could be of any use to him. He remembered that he had initially thought that Cecilia would probably bring back the evidence, but he had never imagined that she herself would be the evidence. It was an unusual turn of events, Carlyle expressed regret, but still indicated that he did not quite understand how she was going to help him. Cecilia smiled again and asked the Duke if he was familiar with Dupre's concept of dovetail. Carlyle replied that he had heard of it and knew that it was the largest learning center in the entire western region of the empire. Cecilia added that it was also the fastest way to spread or gather news. Carlyle was silent, listening to her, although he said that he had only heard about it. In fact, he knew a lot about the swallow's tail. This place raised and trained pigeons, and this was one of the reasons why he had previously wanted to marry Cecilia. Carlyle closed one eye, looked at her slyly, and asked her to continue what she was leading up to, making it clear that he still didn't understand how she could help him. She smiled slyly and said that she was one of the most talented workers in this tale. Carlyle clenched his hand. He didn't really believe that the Earl's daughter was breeding pigeons herself, however. If Cecilia wasn't lying to him, that changed a lot. He thought that in this case, Cecilia could really be of great help to him. Cecilia nodded and said that she understood that while Carlyle was in Pervaz, it was difficult for him to understand the situation in the capital. Carlyle asked her if this meant that she could fix the current situation. Cecilia confirmed this, but first she said that she wanted to tell about the rumors that were spreading in the empire. Carlyle asked with interest to tell him about it. She said that now the residents of the capital are actively comparing Matthias and Carlyle, and the number of people underestimating Carlyle's abilities is growing. Carlyle was shocked by what he heard. He did not understand how he could look worse compared to Matthias, because Matthias never did anything that the people really appreciated. Cecilia continued. She said that Prince Matthias was a genius in the royal sciences, but was said to have been unable to fully demonstrate his abilities due to persecution from Carlyle. He was threatened with murder from a young age, and there is a story that because of this, he could not hold a sword in his hands. Lionel was outraged that this was a distortion of the truth, and no one was pursuing Matthias with the desire to kill anyone, especially not Carlyle. Giles asked indignantly who exactly had the audacity to spread such nonsense. Cecilia's face became serious. According to the information she had, this was done by the priests of the Elan Church. Carlyle was shocked to learn that priests were doing this. He had expected many people in this role, but had not thought of them. Cecilia continued by saying that these priests were appointed by the Empress, and the influence of High Priest Gabriel Knox had increased significantly. Lionel felt a migraine coming on at the news, and suggested that they should put someone on the Pope's side, but Giles said that first they needed to establish the names of the priests who were part of the imperial court. He explained that the Pope is known for his conservative and cautious personality, so it would be strange to do such a thing right away. Carlyle remembered the high priest and thought there was something about the man. Carlyle thanked Cecilia for the information she provided. She bowed and said that the Dupre had always wanted to be strong supporters of Carlyle. Cecilia assured him of her loyalty and promised that she would never betray him because she wanted to take everything into her own hands. She explained that this was the greatest power a woman could have. Carlyle chuckled slightly and said that it was very encouraging to hear that. He left the table, walked up to her, and extended his hand in a welcoming gesture, saying that she was welcome in Pervaz. He asked her if it was difficult for her to stay in Pervaz, but she calmly said that she had been prepared for difficulties in advance. Carlyle asked Lionel to prepare a room for Cecilia on the second floor, and Lionel promised to do so immediately. Carlyle said that he would inform Asha, the owner of the castle, about Cecilia and give them the opportunity to meet. Cecilia said that it would be a great honor for her. Cecilia was lost in her thoughts. She thought that this would be her first meeting with Countess Pervaz, and she needed to carry out the right manipulations. Soon, Asha arrived and asked why she had been called, but the first thing Carlyle did, looking at her, was ask if he had distracted her from her work. Asha confirmed that she had been working in the Palisade workshop, and Carlyle apologized for distracting her from her work, but explained that he did so because he wanted to introduce her to the man who would be staying at the palace. Cecilia stood up to greet Asha and introduced herself as Cecilia from Dupre County. Asha looked at her silently, realizing that she was the person for whom Carlyle had so urgently asked to open the gate. Asha apologized, sympathizing with Cecilia's journey here, since they had not yet managed to repair the roads. Cecilia said that everything was fine because it was her decision, but she expressed her regret about the maid because the carriage was shaking so much and she could not do anything. Asha said that she understood and it couldn't be otherwise, because that's the state of the roads at the moment. Asha asked Carlyle what he was going to do about Lady Dupre's accommodations, and he replied that he had decided to allocate one of the guest rooms on the second floor for her. Cecilia felt confused because Asha ignored what she said about the maid. Cecilia noted that Asha's room was on the first floor, and that it was awkward for her to occupy a room on the same floor as Carlyle, but she hoped that it would not lead to any misunderstandings between them. Asha calmly noted that since Cecilia was Carlyle's guest, he would decide where she would live, and the first floor was not very suitable for a lady. Taking a sip, Carlyle asked why Asha continued to live in that dreary room, but she said that she never considered it dreary and that she found it quite luxurious. Cecilia looked at them in confusion, and Carlyle said that he would send Asha some of the furniture he had brought and asked her to speak to the head housekeeper to help decorate the room. Asha calmly asked why she needed it, since she had never needed such luxury. Carlyle shrugged and said that if Lady Dupre's room was more beautiful than Asha's room, there would be a lot of unnecessary gossip. Asha understood what he was getting at, and in this case expressed her agreement with his proposed action. Thinking that they were done, Asha stood up and asked if she could go. As she still had a lot of work to do, Carlyle let her go. Carlyle then asked Asha to have dinner with him. Asha did not argue and agreed, after which she left them. Cecilia was shocked by what she saw. She did not understand how Asha remained so indifferent when she saw her, because she should have heard that Cecilia was a candidate for the crown princess. She was horrified by the thought that Carlyle had married her, but she was comforted by the hope that they would soon be divorced. But some doubts about this began to creep into her head. She turned her gaze to Carlyle. He drank his tea calmly, and she thought that he was certainly comfortable with her, but she was unlikely to be a hindrance. Catching her gaze, he asked if she wanted to tell him something, but Cecilia answered in the negative. Cecilia mused that while they seemed suspiciously friendly, they had separate bedrooms, and there was no tension between them as a man and a woman, so the problem was more hers, and she would have to prove her worth and abilities so that Carlyle would eventually choose her to be the crown princess. Giles was indignant in his office. Cecilia Dupre's arrival and her words were extremely sudden. He had not planned for it to happen so soon. He thought that if that wasn't enough, Carlyle had been getting closer to Asha lately, and nothing was going according to plan, because Cecilia would definitely try to defend her title of crown princess. He thought that Cecilia was like the current empress and very greedy, while the real empress should be able to calmly support the emperor. Giles thought his daughter would be perfect for the role, as she fit the right image. He took up his pen and began to write a letter, realizing that he had no time for delays and long reflections. He needed to talk to Dorothea. A few days later, this letter reached his daughter Dorothea. She was surprised by such a sudden letter from her father. She carefully took out the letter and felt anxious, because she understood that there were not many reasons why her father could write. After reading her father's letter, she sighed. He still wanted to talk to her, and this conversation could not be avoided now. She sadly reread the letter, and no matter how much she wanted to act differently, she could not disobey her father's words. She had to go to Pervaz, and soon a carriage was equipped for her. She had a difficult and long journey to the castle ahead of her. She rode in the carriage and thought that her father, Giles Rappelt, was called the genius of this century, and he was popular at the academy. She recalled that it was thanks to him that she learned to read at an early age and could do more than others. She remembered the lessons he gave her about how to be a lady who would be respected and loved. She remembered one of those lessons where he told her that if she spoke so loudly to those around her, no one would ever love her. It was hard for her to hear this every time. She felt rejected, but she could never object to her father because it was wrong. Her father often quoted great scientists and even more often criticized her, considering Dorothea stupid. She just always meekly agreed with him, not knowing what else she could say or do. He constantly and strictly told her that this was how it should be, because this is how a lady should behave and follow a man's word. Finally, her carriage arrived at Pervaz, and she got out, looking around the large castle, which seemed a little threatening to her. Soon after, Giles introduced his daughter Dorothea to Carlyle, and they were now together in Carlyle's study. Giles explained to Carlisle that he had called his daughter to help him in various ways. Giles looked at her sternly, and this made Dorothea feel extremely uncomfortable. She spoke further as her father had taught her, and making a curtsy, she wished Carlisle health and greeted him. Carlisle said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time, and since the picky Lord Rappelt had invited her, he would look forward to seeing how her knowledge and skills would demonstrate themselves. She hung her head and said sadly that her father had a lot of work, and she was here to do small errands, not anything more. Giles calmly noted that she was much better than the people he taught at the academy. Dorothea remained silent and looked away. The whole situation was extremely awkward for her, and she wanted to leave as soon as possible. Carlisle chuckled. He had heard that Rappelt was quite an ambitious man, and these rumors were true, because as soon as Cecilia arrived, he immediately called Dorothea. Carlisle said that he understood that it was not easy to get to Pervaz, and he would offer Dorothea a rest, but first she should greet the owner of the castle. But Giles asked her to wait a little, as he had already called for Asha. Dorothea thought that she was the same person who killed countless barbarians and walked the battlefield. She became scared. She was afraid to find out how scary a person Asha was. She mentally tried to pull herself together so as not to frown or get scared in Asha's presence and not give the wrong impression. Soon, Asha's arrival was announced, and she walked confidently into the room with everyone else. Dorothea was pleasantly surprised because Asha did not seem frightening or terrifying to her. She considered her a very beautiful and sweet girl. Dorothea smiled and greeted her with all her heart, greeting Asha much more easily than Carlisle. Asha was surprised that Dorothea called her Her Highness, but upon hearing her last name, she realized that she was probably Rappelt's daughter. Before Asha could ask, Giles confirmed that she was indeed his daughter, saying that he had personally trained her and had now called her here to provide assistance. Asha looked at Carlisle. She understood that this was all because of him, and she was even interested in how many more ladies would arrive in Pervaz. Asha looked at Dorothea and expressed genuine concern about her staying here, since Pervaz was still unsafe. She told Dorothea that she could stay there as long as she needed, but if she went out, it would be better to do so with an escort, and Dorothea thanked her for this concern. Carlisle asked if Asha remembered about dinner, and she confirmed that she remembered the promise to have dinner with him that day. Carlisle thought with some annoyance that she was not at all interested in the people who had come to see him. This upset him even more than he had expected, and he didn't like it at all. Giles left with Dorothea to show her to her room, leaving Carlisle alone with his thoughts. When they had moved away, he told them to call Asha not Her Highness, but simply Countess Pervaz. He continued to press, saying that there was no need to treat the Countess as a member of the imperial family. Dorothea carefully pointed out that even though it was a contractual relationship, Asha was still technically married to Carlisle, and that ignoring her title would create problems. But Giles didn't let her finish. He interrupted her, angrily said that he knew about it, but there is such a thing as the power of words, and it plays a very important role in life. He said that if she continued to call Asha that, then even Carlisle would at some point acknowledge her as his wife. He turned and walked on, telling Dorothea to remember to visit Carlisle while she was there. Dorothea didn't think what was happening was right, but all she could do was meekly agree with what her father told her to do. She tried to console herself by thinking that if she became the crown princess, she would at least be able to read whatever book she wanted. She looked towards the office they had come out of and thought she was going to have to try really hard. The next day, Asha spoke with the new butler and asked him to take care of Pervaz Castle. Samuel, the new butler of Pervaz Castle, promised to do everything in his power. The head maid watched with a smile as the butler and Asha shook hands, and Decker felt a little uneasy. Asha turned to Della. She said that she understood that she was busy, but it would be very good if she helped Samuel settle in. Della was only glad of this order. She asked the butler to follow her to give her a tour of Pervaz Castle. The butler bowed to Asha and said goodbye to her, following Della to begin his business. Decker and Asha watched them go, both feeling a certain peace and joy from what was happening. Asha smiled, saying that the wind was cool and maybe they should explore the castle. Decker agreed with this and was happy to help. They walked around the castle, checking if everything was in order, if there was any damage, and if their participation was required. As the maids hung out the laundry, Asha anxiously asked if Pervaz had improved, and Decker replied that he certainly had. Asha thanked Decker for convincing Samuel to work for them, but Decker didn't understand what exactly she was thanking him for, since Samuel had made this decision on his own. They sat down on a bench, and looking at their surroundings, Asha noticed that autumn had really come. Decker confirmed that this was indeed the case and that they would soon have their first harvest. Asha happily said that they would be able to stock up on food for the entire winter, and Decker added that moreover, next year and the year after that, they would be able to sell the surplus food. Asha looked away with a smile, thinking about this, and Decker thought that he was glad to see her smiling. But he still decided that it was important to talk about something else, and he told Asha about it, and with the same smile, she turned to him and asked what exactly he wanted to talk about. He said